Gumbiner for taking these gorgeous photos with her two friends, Matthew and Dave H. Wells. This project is a long time coming. It started almost 20 years ago when the temple was up for sale, chain link fence around it, going to be torn down for a parking lot. A group of volunteers got together, and now, very hard work, and many years later, we have a beautiful space to gather together. Thank you too to my board, and especially to Appelklein for making this happen today, and also to everyone who has worked so hard over the years to all the evolutions of the space. And quickly, I want to make sure everyone knows about our next big event, which is October 26th. It's our annual fall benefit, and we are honoring Justice Stanley Feldman, who is a Supreme Court Justice, and also on the Arizona Supreme Court Justice, and on the bench for 20 years. Please, there are tickets online, there are tickets coming to you in the mail that you can buy, and the invitation is on its way. October 26th, put it on your calendars. And I'm going to quickly turn over the mic to Abigail because she has a lot to say about the exhibit, and our guest of honor, Miss Ruth Matthews, is here today with us. She was part of the integration of the congregation next door, Prince Chapel, and our space in 1940s. Abigail's father, Joseph Gumbiner, made a huge effort to have the two congregations work together. And Miss Ruth Matthews was the secretary at the time over at the Prince Chapel A&E. And Abigail's going to show you the photograph of the interracial services that happened.
Thank you. My grandson, Jordan Schwartz, is here helping me out. The son of my daughter, Tamar Halpern, right there, who's a filmmaker. She knows about this stuff. And the videotape is running compliments of my old friend Rick Peterson in the back. So there'll be a tape of this for the museum to use. It's museum worthy, and for us, the family, and too. Judy, a wonderful director who's been here, about 6 months now, is really responsible for making this photo come to you, the public. And also a lot of new information and the exhibits about my father, Rabbi Joseph Gumbiner. So Judy has asked me to complete a very small task in a short period of time today. She said, talk about the work, the whole project, what brought you here, and then mostly we want to hear about your father. So do that. Now, many of you know the expression about teaching everything that was contained in our scrolls in the Torah while standing on one foot. You know that one? Thanks, Judy. So I won't be standing on one foot, but that's how I feel right now. Let me tell you what brought me to this building. And then I'll go backwards and trace the early history of my parents here. And that is that I was in Tucson in 1995. I was working on one of my first photography projects. I was running around town like crazy as a visitor, staying with my old friend Frances Burfeld, who's with her daughter here today, whose parents were close friends of my parents when Dad was here in the synagogue. And I was taking photographs of all the old motels in Tucson because the bulldozer hadn't found them yet. It was a gold mine of neon, retro, 66 kinds of stuff. And ultimately, the photographs were published in a book, sort of a nostalgic look at Tucson. And it's here today. I donated it to the building, and if you want to pick up a copy, I'll be happy to sign it if it appeals to you. And the proceeds go directly to the museum. Anyway, I'm running around town and I find out where the old synagogue was. I hadn't really looked at it for ages. And I pulled up and I was horrified. Chain link fence, like Judy just said, a huge long looking for sale sign on it. The building was weeping. It was so sad. It was falling apart. Weeds in the front yard and it had been deserted. by the Jewish community and historians here. For reasons I don't completely understand, but this happens, you know, when people move to the suburbs and they have to build new temples and stuff like that. I took the picture of it, which is a part of the exhibit. It's in the front just for informational reasons, and I'll put it back up on the wall, but I did want to point it out to you. It really started this whole project in many ways. So, I moved back to Tucson, I believe in 1998, and soon became aware of the small community of people who were raising funds and saved the building. There was a head of them, was a wonderful woman named Toby Sidney, who actually made it happen. And the best they could do then, as they scrounged for funding, and Reedy Morton is sitting here, and she remembers the early days, and was very instrumental in helping this happen, was to slap on a coat of white paint on the outside and clean up the floor. White paint inside, very inexpensive fixtures and stuff like that. And they knew they wanted to have it be some sort of a Jewish organization, certainly not a synagogue, because Tucson didn't need any more of them, but some sort of a cultural institution. And I got to know them, and she invited me inside. She said, "Well, you're a photographer. Why don't you take pictures?" And so I did. I got a lot of shots by myself of the interior as it appeared to those of us who made the building then. I became fascinated with it. And as a matter of fact, I married my husband here, Peter Holmes, who was a fine art lithographer here. Some of you may have known him. And we were living here. And I brought in two friends who here referred to here. David H. Wells, and because you always have to distinguish him from the baseball player, and his wife, Anu Matthew, came to Tucson all the time to visit me on vacations from the East Coast. They thought they were in diving on to heaven when they were here. And they came by 2 times a year, and somehow I got them involved in the project. And this became a long-term collaboration. 3 photographers, essentially a one-room, like an old-fashioned one-room schoolhouse. I mean, how many pictures and how many photographers take of the interior of this room over and over and over again? It was amazing feat. Most artists don't work in collaborations. I'm not sure why. It could have to do with ego, maybe something like that. But this was my second collaboration. The photography book was a collaboration with another photographer too. I loved it, but you have to set down ground rules about how to seek consensus, no voting when you're trying to pull out the best 20 or the best 50. After each time we go shoot, we run and take the film. We started in film, of course. And get little prints made and spread them out on the table and shuffle through them. And of course, some of them looked exactly alike because there's only so much you can photograph. Some of them were different takes, different emotional takes. The feeling of the place at that time, for me, besides nostalgia for my father and for the family, was very, a little bit mysterious, sort of smoky. And I think Anu in particular, who's a very well-known famous photographer now, captured that in her black and whites of the white pews sort of marching along in rows. And we worked with light, and then we worked into color, and we worked into slide film, and then we worked into digital. We all took the adventure into digital on the state here, of course. Once you've done it, you can't go back. And a set of pictures began to emerge, and we had the idea, why don't we put together some sort of portfolio and donate it to the committee who are raising funds, and let them have shows with it. So it just didn't happen for a long time. And it went all the way through the complete reconstruction with the gorgeous new windows that we're all enjoying now. And many trips back, when I would come back here to take a particular shot that Eileen, wonderful director here, would want me to take them on the outside, inside. So anyway, it was supposed to be a traveling show. Maybe it was going to be a photography book, on and on. It couldn't happen. The financial meltdown happened, and the board and the director felt this is not the right time to try to, raise money this way. So we went to bed, and I was disappointed. But I keep coming back and checking in and maybe talking about maybe who really made it happen and put it together. I'm so thankful to them, and it's so gratifying for me to be here today, to be seeing you, lots of extended family members, friends. So that's how the project happened. Let me go backwards. Oh, a couple of funny things I wanted to tell you though about a collaboration like that. When we'd have the photos out, David, who is both a commercial and an artistic photographer, would get really antsy with his wife and me, the two women, and we'd keep bickering over, no, it's this, it should be this one, should be in the portfolio, no, that one. And he'd say, let's vote. And I had done this rule, there would be no voting, you've got to see consensus. And you know that in small group theory. You have to see consensus by making your point and talking the other people into the point you're trying to make until there's someone happy. And that was what he had agreed to, and we'd have to slap him down when he wanted to go. So, anyway, let me go backwards now and start at the beginning of my life in the synagogue because of my parents. My father, Rabbi Gumbiner, who was the rabbi here for 6.5 years in the 1940s, had been ordained as a liberal rabbi, a reform rabbi, in Cincinnati at Abigail College, I believe in 1931. And as a baby rabbi, his first congregation was in Selma, Alabama. You didn't choose one another. It was the college would send you out and find you jobs. And I don't think he had ever been in the Deep South before, but he was game, and he actually was successfully there for 9 years. Had a very mixed relationship with the Deep South, appreciated some of the wonderful things about it that we all know about, but was extremely disturbed by the racial inequality that was really just, your nose was just rubbed in it in Alabama and many other states at the time. He realized that this existed all over our country. He wasn't, stupid about things like that, but it was particularly irritating to him. And he became, right then, baby rabbi, right behind the ears, socially active, trying to get some rights for Negro citizens. It started with, during the New Deal, Roosevelt's New Deal, tuberculosis was running rampant. And there was money available, but it was only available for white families to build a little tent outside the house, a little cabin, so you could, isolate the person with TB. But nothing for the black community. So he formed a committee that fought to get funding for that to occur. I don't know if this was greatly appreciated by the white community, you can only imagine. But then, just in case nobody paid any attention to him, I guess, no, that's a bad joke. An amazing trial was taking place in Selma while I was there. And if you don't know about it, look it up, it's all over the place now. And it was a trial of 9 teenage black youths who were accused of raping 2 white women. It was a complete setup. It was a huge scandal in this country that went on for decades. People wanted to lynch these young men. It was horrible. It was just horrible. And a very famous lawyer came down from the north to represent them. Some of them, they were able to get off. Some did serve prison time. And eventually all were forgiven and the charges were dropped. My father was so wrapped up in this that he preached about it from his pulpit to his congregation several times, making sure that he was educating them about it. How can this be happening in our community? I don't think they loved him much more for that either. I mean, Jews can be just as prejudiced as anybody else, and that's the way it was then. So he eventually left Selma, primarily because he and my mother wanted to get married First of all, to tell you about my mother, Sylvia. She came from a Russian Jewish family that were quite liberal and not very religious. And she refused to be married to a rabbi. She'd have none of it. She was an intellectual, and who on earth would want to do that? And he was so madly in love with her. She said, I'll marry you if you put me on rabbi. And he said, okay. As though one could just sort of shed that skin and become something else. I don't think it's quite so easy. And so they brainwashed her being on rabbi and had a set of books, wonderful bookstore, one of the first ones ever in the state of Nevada. First lending library in the state of Nevada they had. And it was tobacco and pipes, which my father dearly loved, and books. And pretty soon, some of the Jews, the liberal Jews, had no place to go. I think they were like the one little Orthodox synagogue in Reno. And they discovered the rabbi in hiding. And back in the bookstore, who insisted in teaching classes, right? Take care of all kinds of stuff, churchly for them and stuff like that. My mother finally threw the towel in and said, oh, all right, you know, whatever. Because he was eating up all of his time, he was filling the bookstore with people who weren't customers. So anyway, he founded the first Reformed congregation in the state of Nevada, then in Reno, which is still going strong today. At some point, I believe, early 40s, 1942, he was offered the post here at Temple Emmanuel in Tucson. You all know this was the original Temple Emmanuel. Most of you know the history of the building. And when we got here, and by then I was about a year and a half old when we moved here, there were very few members attached to the building officially anyway here. And when Dad left 6.5 years later, he was bursting at the seams. He was a very good orator. He was very good at community organization. And it was really wonderful. They knew they had to build a bigger building and do a lot of fundraising to buy the land on Country Club up above where we brought up the big Temple Emmanuel. I mean, first you have to pay for the land, then you have to raise all the funds for a building that can really have school and all the things you need for a big congregation. So let me tell you a couple of the highlights that took place while he was here. Do you all know who Rabbi Drager was here? Rabbi Drager was the founding rabbi for Anshe Israel, the big conservative temple. And although he came from an Orthodox background, I believe they held services here at times. And he and my father became very, very close friends, which lasted well beyond the time that they were in Tucson. And he and Dad did a lot of work together also in the community. At the same time that my father was rabbi here, he became the first Hillel director at the Hillel Foundation at the University of Arizona. He loved that. And that would sort of describe what the end of his career. So he ended up being a Hillel director full time in a couple of places, I'll tell you. So they were up to all kinds of interesting shenanigans. But the most important thing that happened was that he was the founder of and on the executive committee of the Tucson Interracial Council, and a newspaper article describing what it was, and all of the ministers and lay people who were involved in it ran in the Arizona Daily Star. And I'm going to quote a couple of things from his little short biography so you can hear them in his words for why that was necessary and then what happened. So this is a quote from my dad. During the war years in Tucson, there was a great deal of racial tension, particularly when large numbers of Negro servicemen, railroads, from nearby Fort Huachuca came to Tucson and were denied access to the local USO. They come here for a little R&R, like all the other soldiers, and they couldn't even get he says, I became one of the founders and a member of an executive committee of the Tucson Interracial Council, an organization designed to allay such tensions and to build good interrelations among Caucasians, Negroes, Latin Americans, and the Indian elements of the population, as well as among Catholics, Protestants, and Jews. I mean, not small, right? To this day, it's hard to achieve anything having to do with that. He continues, my activity in this committee did not please some of the members of the synagogue. They became restive. When the older Jewish settlers, by then members of the more fashionable Episcopalian Church, told them that the activity of their rabbi in interracial affairs was bad for the position of the Jews in the city. These are different times, of course. I suppose it's sort of, this is me speaking about that. It probably was a little scary to them. They probably felt, so, okay, let me finish this quote, not mix it all up with stuff. Although the committee did not achieve very much at the time, I remained active in it, and the groundwork was laid for a later interracial commission to be appointed by the mayor, which resulted in the desegregation of the schools in Tucson, which had still been segregated at that time. So I guess that gave him some satisfaction. So in his written notes comes the result of that. He states, in a congregation not accustomed to democratic process, I was once summoned to a meeting of a special committee in the local interracial organization. Quote within the quote, the boys are getting hot, the head man of my congregation said. If you don't pull out now, I'll have to call a special meeting and ask for your resignation. I found out later that the boys were all non-members of the congregation. A small group of men, some converted to Christianity, some just totally removed from Jewish life, who told my most prominent members what to do, and they in turn told the congregation what to do. This really inflamed a lot of anger among some of his congregants, and particularly among the ones who were very successful financially. I don't know if you know this about Tucson, but a lot of the big department stores were very successfully developed and owned by prominent Jewish families. Some of them were lifelong friends of my parents, but some of them were people who really wanted to get rid of my father by then because they were embarrassed by his actions. The anger of some of these members was further inflamed when Dad made another effort at interracial understanding by inviting the Negro church next door, your church, to the synagogue to participate in a cultural exchange of music. The wonderful all-black choir sang here on the altar, in Hebrew, and the altar, and the Jewish musicians from here, the cantor and the little choir that they had, went and performed at the church. I found a photo in their album of this event, and now it is proudly displayed here in case. I grabbed it just to call your attention to it. There's Dad, on the altar, with the choir from next door. I believe one of the men is the president. One of them is certainly his cantor, Herman Novak, and I'm not sure there's another one, I'm not sure who he is. And in the very front row here, there's a very young woman standing there. And that young woman is sitting right here in front of me today. John, would you stand up and introduce her to us, please?
Hello, everyone. My name is Don Matthews. Young woman, this is my mother. Ruth Matthews. And I was really interested in seeing the picture because that picture was taken 3B. So, I got a chance to see what my mother looked like before I came here. She was very excited about coming here and attending this today. I'm very glad and thankful that you have us.
Very, very emotional for me. That's excellent. I have to contain myself, but I'm so happy to see you here. Thank you. And I think there's some other representatives of the church in here also visiting us today. So it's so wonderful to see a whole circle of history taking place right here. Right here. Yeah, I see people wiping their tears away. So my father continued to discuss these and many issues pertaining to social injustice from this pulpit in many of his sermons. I guess he was just making sure that some of the folks did not accidentally miss out on some of the messages. Well, he was heard all right, and they had annual meetings. They had a board of directors, and every 3 years, the rabbi's contract would be renewed or not. He was an employee of the congregation. And the people who were so angered decided to really get rid of him, try to get him out of here. And they called at the congregational meeting, the big shots, pulled out as many people as they possibly could to vote him out. And the people who were supporters, like the Bernfelds and several other families who loved him and thought he was doing the right thing, really got to it and organized. And they didn't vote late at night, and he was not allowed to be present. He had to sit in his house and wait for the phone call. And he won by a 2-1 margin. They renewed his contract, they gave him a little pay raise, the whole thing. He was very happy, and all the supporters were ecstatic about it. Well, that's not the end of the story. The temple absolutely had to be built. I don't remember if the money was already mostly raised to buy the land, and eventually the historians here will figure this out, or if that mostly happened when the wonderful Rabbi Gilbert followed my father here. But the big givers who made pledges to buy the land and to build the building said this to the board of directors: okay, we keep Gumbiner here as your rabbi. We are withdrawing all finances from the building campaign. We'll either give it to Anja, I'll go join there, or we'll start another reform temple. Dad really believed in the formation of synagogues. I mean, he'd already, established one, and he went on in his life to do it again someplace else. And he did not want to create this kind of rift in the community. It was very uncomfortable. The community was small enough. How many times do you have to be torn apart over something like this? He sought employment elsewhere. He got hired by what was then a tiny congregation in the San Fernando Valley, Beth Hillel. And we moved there, and he handed in his resignation. We moved there at the end of 46, I believe. Where's my historian? 1947, thank you. Okay. I went to Sam Hughes here. I have so many memories about Tucson. And we kept coming back to visit all his old friends. There was always a house for us to stay in. It was great fun. We always thought it was like being on vacation. I almost had a second life in Tucson. My first husband, my lovely daughter's father, who was a family from here. A couple of my high school boyfriends I met at a Jewish camp were from Tucson. And my grandson's whole family is here. Tomorrow's son, Jordan. His uncles, his grandpa, his grandma, it's everybody. Yes, and cousins, and they're all here today. And I'm so happy to see everybody here. So we're still very attached to Tucson, and that's kind of what happened to him here. I'll just briefly tell you the end of the story. I don't want to go on too long. I know you've been staying a long time. When I'm done with this little presentation, I'm happy to take questions. and I can continue with the mic or not. And the rest of you need to either leave or stretch or go to have something to drink, and I'm dying to have one of those glasses of champagne. But we can continue the conversation about anything that you have questions about or you're concerned about. So we went to North Hollywood. That temple only had 38 members when we arrived. 2 years later, he left, and we're more than 250 members. He really loved his work with the students here. I forgot to tell you, in his spare time, he also got a master's degree in philosophy from the U of A, and he taught a few philosophy courses here. I don't know how people do all these things, it's crazy. He was offered the Hill directorship at Yale University. And although it was in a cold climate, my parents could not resist it. Could not resist it. Went there, we were there for almost 7 years, and I started high school there, and it was wonderful for him. Also, he really liked being not tied to a congregation and a board of directors anymore. I mean, he mentions it in his own notes how nice it is. Not to have to deal with all of that, and he loved teaching, so there you go. And then he was offered the directorship of the Hillel Foundation at Berkeley, and he started a 17-year career there. I grew up, a lot of my time was in the Berkeley area. He was very successful, and he loved it. So let me come full circle on the theme of his social action. He, having lived in the South, I forgot to tell you something else too. The whole thing about the history of the South and the interest in it, we lived especially on the East Coast. We drove back and forth across the country at least once a year to visit my mom's parents in LA. And they dragged me through the Deep South countless times. I saw every single historical site, Confederate sites. It was a wonderful education. I mean, what a great way to learn history and geography. And when I was probably about junior high school age, I began to notice, and they pointed out to me the signs, white only. What does that mean? It's crazy. What does that mean? And I really found out. I mean, they explained it to me, and that was the first time that I began to understand something about the racial prejudice in our country here. Never mind about the rest of the world, but here. And it was a very profound experience for the family to see it over and over again. When he was in Berkeley in the early 1960s, he was very, very interested in the writings and the speeches of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. And Dad often spoke about it, both quoting him from the pulpit here in his Friday night sermons. And he and Reverend King shared an interest. They didn't know one another. They shared an interest in the philosopher and theologian's writings, Martin Buber. Some of you know who Martin Buber was. And both Dr. King, quote from Buber, and Dad was, loved studying Martin Buber's teaching. We all were sitting around looking at newspapers, and we saw horrendous photographs of people getting their heads smashed in Mississippi and in Alabama. The early protesters went down there, both blacks and whites. And it was terrifying. It was terrifying. Lynching was still taking place. I mean, I can't imagine having the strength and the nerve to go out there and protest and be a part of that. As many people did. Many people joined the movement. So the first time he went there, he went to Jackson, Mississippi. If you remember, there was a huge voting registration drive taking place in the black community. And a whole bunch of white supporters and people from all over came down to help with that. And he went down there. He did not have the permission of his employers, who were the B'nai Foundation, employs all the directors on campuses. And at that time, they weren't known for being screaming liberals themselves. And Dad appropriately approached them. He knew the guys who had a bit of pals of his. So I just want to let you know that as with my title. I'm going down there and burning it, and they said, we can't, Joe, we just can't give you, our blessing for it. So he went to Jackson, Mississippi, a small man, not very tall, who had never, I believe, faced any physical altercations or ever been trained in self-defense or anything like that. He went down there and joined the movement, and he not only risked himself physically, but he risked his career. If bad publicity had come out, who knows what would have happened. So he was in Jackson, and he was arrested for sitting in a coffee shop with black and white ministers. Now that story is told in a fabulous article he wrote that they have reprints of here. It was published in the Reconstructionist magazine, a really interesting magazine from that time, in 2 segments in January of '62. And the title of it, Dad's title of it is Rabbi Takes a Stand in Dixie. And it's a great description of all the people he met there, what was going on, what it felt like. I guess, not wanting to miss out on any further excitement, in 1965, he joined the struggle again and returned to Selma, Alabama. Selma. He returned there to join one of the marches on Montgomery. It became one of the segments some of the marches did. He was very, very excited about doing that. He was a delegation of 5 rabbis from the San Francisco Bay Area. Before joining the March on Montgomery, which is what he thought he was down there to do, Dad was identified by Reverend King's group as the rabbi who once been rabbi in Selma. They put 2 and 2 together somehow, they found out. And he was invited by Reverend King's assistant, a man named Harry Boyd, to lead a protest in the all-white neighborhood of Selma in front of the mayor's house. He went to jail again, and he wonderfully describes that in a 1965 article in the Reconstructionist called Purim in Alabama. Purim is a Jewish holiday. It comes in the early spring, and that's when he was in jail. It would have been the holiday of Purim. So that's available for you guys over there to hopefully enjoy. He was the kind of rabbi that was steeped in prophetic Judaism, the prophets, both biblical plus biblical writings, and he was passionate about the ethical code that Judaism had developed during its history. He felt, by the way, I don't know if most of you know this, we always think about the 10 Commandments. There aren't 10 Commandments in the Torah. There are 613 commandments. We don't talk about those, right? Yes, yes. And they're all about things in a very complicated ethical code, about how to treat other people, how to treat non-Jewish people, how to treat your employees, how to treat your animals, how to treat the sick, the dying, etc. It's amazing. And one of the most significant commandments, and I don't know why it didn't end up in the Decalogue, was the commandment that commanded us to participate in Hebrew Tikkun Olam, which is translated the repair of the world. Tikkun Olam is the word for world, the repair of the world. It's not voluntary, in other words. For all of us, it's do something to help repair what needs repairing in the world. He really. What was that?
Police
Okay.
radio.
All right. So, when I was growing up with him, we had many exchanges about religious faith, and particularly about faith in God. He clearly had a personal relationship with God. He really deeply believed in God. And I became more and more an atheist. I mean, at first, you could say, oh, of course you had to be, because you had to separate yourself from your parents. But has to do with my thought process too. So as a younger adult, I challenged him more than once on these questions because he wanted me desperately to say, well, yeah, maybe there's a chance there's a God. And I, had free access to him and to challenge him too. And I asked him if he felt that more prophets were being created past all of the post-biblical writings. Were there any more prophets? And not hesitating, he responded, yes, absolutely. I couldn't help pushing him further, insisting, well, like who? Without taking a breath, he answered, Martin Luther King. I will take questions, but I want those who want to, please stand up, stretch, wander around